The bell above the restaurant's entrance chimed softly as a man in tattered clothes stepped inside. Heads turned immediately, and within seconds, whispers spread across the floor like wildfire. The place was a high-end establishment, white tablecloths, dim golden lighting, and a menu where even an appetizer could cost a small fortune. The man's clothes were old, frayed at the edges, and his shoes had seen better days. His hair, though neatly combed, was streaked with dust, and his face, though handsome, had the weariness of someone who had spent the night on the streets. Behind the counter, a young hostess named Mia wrinkled her nose. She was used to dealing with difficult customers, but this was something else. A homeless man? Here, she straightened her posture and forced a professional smile. "Sir, I think you may have the wrong place," she said politely but firmly. The man's eyes, a sharp shade of green, flickered with amusement. "I don't think so," he replied. "I'd like a table, please." Mia hesitated. "Sir, we have a dress code." And I'm afraid, before she could finish, a loud scoff came from across the room that a man in a tailored navy blue suit, a customer, sneered loudly. "Is this some kind of joke? We don't need beggars ruining our dinner." His date, a woman dressed in designer clothes, laughed cruelly. The tension in the restaurant was thick. More patrons stared, some with pity, others with irritation. "Sir," Mia said more firmly now, "I'll have to ask you to leave." But the man in rags didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying the restaurant's decor, the paintings on the wall, the placement of the wine bar. "I used to love this place," he murmured, almost to himself. "Didn't think I'd ever be thrown out of it." Mia's patience snapped. "Security," she called, waving at the two burly guards near the entrance. The guard strode forward, ready to escort him out, until a voice boomed from the back of the restaurant. "Wait. Stop right there." A hushed silence fell over the crowd as everyone turned toward the kitchen. The owner of the restaurant, an elderly man in a crisp chef's uniform, stepped out, his face pale. His eyes locked onto the man in rags, and in a heartbeat, his expression transformed into pure shock. "Dear God, it's you." The entire restaurant froze. Mia, still reeling from shock, hurriedly grabbed a menu and gestured toward an open table near the restaurant's window. "Right this way, Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her previous arrogance now replaced by nervous respect, but Ethan didn't move. Instead, he glanced at the table where the rude customer sat, the man who had humiliated him just moments ago. "Actually," Ethan said casually, "I think I'll take this table." The entire restaurant went silent. The arrogant man in the navy blue suit stiffened. His face was already pale, but now he looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. His date fidgeted, clearly realizing the mistake they had made. "And Mr. Sterling," the man stammered, forcing a nervous laugh. "I didn't recognize you. Please sit." It was all just a misunderstanding. Ethan pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, folding his arms on the table. His green eyes glowed with amusement. "A misunderstanding?" he echoed. "That's funny. I could have sworn you call me a beggar ruining your dinner." The man's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Across the restaurant, waiters who had previously ignored Ethan were now scrambling to serve him, practically tripping over themselves to bring the finest wine, the best dishes on the menu. The shift in energy was undeniable. People were no longer whispering insults about him. They were whispering in awe. Mia, trying to salvage the situation, offered a polite smile. "Mr. Sterling, we're honored to have you here. Would you like to see the menu?" Ethan glanced at the gold-trimmed menu, then smirked. "I don't need it." He leaned back in his chair, his tone turning nostalgic. "After all, I created half the dishes in this place." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The younger customers exchanged confused glances. But the older ones, the ones who had been dining here for decades, immediately understood that Mr. Langford, the restaurant's current owner, cleared his throat. "For those of you who don't know, Ethan Sterling is the original owner of this restaurant. This place, it wouldn't exist without him." The crowd erupted in hushed murmurs. Ethan nodded. "That's right," he said. "I built this restaurant from the ground up. I personally trained the first set of chefs. I picked out the decor, the menu, the staff. I made it a place where anyone, rich or poor, could come and enjoy good food. His gaze darkened slightly as he looked at Mia, the security guards, and a rude customer in a navy blue suit. But I guess somewhere along the way, that changed. Mia lowered her gaze, ashamed. The security guards shifted uncomfortably. And the rude customer? He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Ethan slowly exhaled, then picked up a glass of water from the table. "But I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I just wanted to see how things had changed." Mr. Langford cleared his throat. "You're always welcome here, Ethan." Then, after a pause, he hesitated before asking the question that was on everyone's mind. "But where have you been? Why did you disappear?" The restaurant leaned in, waiting for his answer. For the first time since walking in, Ethan's smirk disappeared. He set the water glass down without drinking from it. His expression turned serious. "Because I was betrayed," he said softly. A heavy silence fell over the room. The weight of Ethan's words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. The entire restaurant seemed frozen, all eyes locked on him. Even Mia, who had dismissed him as a nobody just moments ago, stood still, her breath caught in her throat. Mr. Langford, the restaurant's owner, hesitated before speaking. "Betrayed? By who?" Ethan let out a quiet chuckle, though there was no humor in it. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together on the table. "By the people I trusted the most." The restaurant patrons exchanged nervous glances. Even the rude customer in the navy blue suit seemed intrigued despite his embarrassment. Ethan exhaled deeply. 10 years ago, I wasn't just the owner of this restaurant. I was the CEO of a billion-dollar hospitality empire. I built everything from scratch, worked my way up, made the right investments. But at the peak of my success, my own board of directors, people I considered family, turned against me. He picked up the water glass again, staring at the ripples on the surface. They accused me of fraud, used legal loopholes to push me out. They stripped me of everything. My company, my assets, even my name on the restaurants I created. Overnight, I went from a billionaire to a man with nothing. A hushed gasp rippled through the restaurant. Mia's face turned pale as guilt clawed at her stomach. Mr. Langford looked horrified. I had no idea. I thought you left on your own terms." Ethan shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I didn't leave. I was forced out." Then he let out a dry laugh. "And the worst part? The man who orchestrated it all, the one who made sure I lost everything, was my best friend." The room fell into dead silence. Mr. Langford's fingers curled into fists. "You mean Jackson Hayes?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Yes." Mia let out a small gasp. Even she recognized that name. Jackson Hayes, the ruthless billionaire who now owned most of the city's finest restaurants. He was known for his cutthroat business tactics and his hunger for domination in the industry. Ethan smirked, though his eyes burned with something dangerous. "He thought he buried me. He thought I'd disappear forever." He set down the water glass. "But I'm back." The weight of those words sent a chill down Mia's spine. Even Mr. Langford looked uneasy. The rude customer, now visibly sweating, cleared his throat. "Well, that's quite a story," he mumbled, trying to recover. "But, what exactly are you planning to do now?" Ethan smiled. "That's the best part." He leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms behind his head. "I came here today for a reason." Mr. Langford swallowed hard. "And that is?" Ethan's gaze swept across the room, a quiet fire burning behind his green eyes. "To take back what's mine." A heavy silence settled over the restaurant, thick with tension. Mia could feel her pulse in her throat. The revelation of Ethan's identity had shattered everything she assumed about him. Mr. Langford was the first to speak. "Ethan, what exactly do you mean by taking back what's yours?" His voice was cautious, as if he already sensed the storm brewing. Ethan leaned forward, tapping his fingers against the table in a steady rhythm. "I mean exactly that. This restaurant, your entire business, is built on the foundation I created. Jackson Hayes stole my empire, but he couldn't steal my knowledge, my experience, or my ability to rebuild." The rude customer, now visibly uncomfortable, forced a laugh. "Huh, so what? You're going to open a little food cart and take on Jackson Hayes? Good luck with that." Ethan's smirk never wavered. "Oh, I have something bigger in mind." He turned his attention back to Mr. Langford. "I came here to make an offer. One you can't refuse." Mr. Langford's brows furrowed. "What kind of offer?" Ethan clasped his hands together. "A partnership. I know how Jackson runs his business, how he undercuts competitors, how he manipulates suppliers, how he controls the market. You're in his grasp, aren't you?" Mr. Langford's lips tightened, and Mia saw the truth in his eyes. "He threatened to shut us down," Mr. Langford admitted. "Said if we didn't agree to his terms, he'd make sure we couldn't get any premium ingredients. Our suppliers suddenly started raising prices. Some of our best chefs were poached away. I had no choice but to sign his contract. He takes a percentage of everything we make now." Ethan shook his head, his jaw clenching. Classic Jackson. Mia's heart sank. She had no idea the restaurant was struggling under such pressure. The rude customer scoffed. "You can't fight him. Jackson Hayes owns half this city." Ethan shot him a sharp look. That's what he wants everyone to believe. But no man is invincible. He turned back to Mr. Langford. "I have a plan. Give me control over the business for 6 months. I'll break Jackson's grip and make this restaurant more successful than it's ever been." Mr. Langford hesitated, glancing at Mia. "That's a bold claim, Ethan. I built an empire once. I can do it again," Ethan said with quiet confidence. Mia finally found her voice. "And what if you fail?" Ethan looked at her, his green eyes burning with determination. "Then I walk away. No strings attached." Mr. Langford exhaled slowly. "And if you succeed?" Ethan's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Then we take down Jackson Hayes together." The air crackled with energy. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal, and Ethan had just declared war. Mr. Langford's fingers drummed against the table, his expression unreadable. Mia watched him closely, sensing the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "You're asking me to put everything on the line," Mr. Langford said, his voice low. "My restaurant, my employees, my livelihood." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "I'm asking you to believe in me. You said it yourself. Jackson already has you in his grip. If we do nothing, he'll bleed you dry until there's nothing left." Mia swallowed hard, feeling a mix of emotions. She had spent years working for Mr. Langford. This restaurant was her second home, and now she was seeing it from a new perspective, a battlefield in a silent war. The rude customer scoffed, shaking his head. "You're insane if you think you can beat Jackson. He owns every major supplier in this city. He has politicians in his pocket. The moment you step up, he'll crush you." Ethan turned to him, an amused smile tugging at his lips. "Then why do you look so nervous?" The man's expression stiffened. Mia suddenly had a realization. This wasn't just any customer. This man wasn't here for a meal. He was watching them, reporting back to Jackson. Ethan must have noticed the same thing because his next words were sharper. "Run along now. Tell Jackson I'm back." The man hesitated for just a moment before standing up, shoving his chair back roughly. "You're making a mistake," he hissed before storming out of the restaurant that a silence settled over the table. Then Mr. Langford exhaled. "If I do this, I need guarantees, Ethan. If Jackson retaliates, I'll handle him." Ethan interrupted. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of steel beneath it.mr. Langford sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mia, what do you think?" She wasn't expecting that. All eyes turned to her. Her heart pounded. She had spent the last few years working under Mr. Langford, and she had seen firsthand how Jackson's influence had made life harder for everyone. Ethan was offering them a way out. But what cost? Finally, she spoke. "I think, if we don't fight back now, we'll regret it later." Ethan smiled. "Smart choice." Mr. Langford inhaled deeply, then extended his hand across the table. "You have 6 months." Ethan shook his hand firmly. "That's all I need." Mia had no idea what Ethan had planned, but one thing was clear. Jackson Hayes had no idea what was coming. 2 days later, the restaurant was busier than ever. Word had spread about the strange man in rags who had been thrown out, only for the owner to personally invite him back in. Customers whispered theories, trying to piece together the truth behind the story. Mia, balancing a tray of drinks, couldn't help but notice how Ethan sat in the corner, watching everything unfold with a quiet confidence. He hadn't said much since his meeting with Mr. Langford, but something told her he was planning his next move. Just as she reached the table, the front door swung open with force. A group of men in expensive suits stepped inside. Mia's stomach tightened. Jackson Hayes, he was a broad-shouldered man with slicked-back hair, his presence alone commanding attention. His eyes scanned the restaurant until they landed on Ethan. A slow smirk spread across his lips. "Well," Jackson drawled, stepping forward, "I heard a little rumor that a certain someone has come crawling back into my city." Ethan didn't even bother standing up. He simply leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Not crawling, walking. You should try it sometime." A ripple of tension spread through the restaurant. The customers pretended not to notice, but Mia could see their nervous glances. Jackson let out a low chuckle. "Same old Ethan, always thinking you're untouchable." His gaze flickered to Mr. Langford, who had stepped out from behind the bar. "Langford, I hope you're not making a very stupid decision." Mr. Langford's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Jackson turned back to Ethan. "You think you can run this game, but you've already lost. You don't have the connections anymore. You don't have the power, and you sure as hell don't have the money to challenge me." Ethan smirked. "That's where you're wrong." Jackson's smirk faltered for just a second. Mia noticed. Ethan pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A few moments later, every phone in the restaurant dinged with a notification. Mia glanced at her own, her eyes widening. A news article, a leaked document, a financial scandal, and Jackson's name was all over it. The restaurant was silent. Then whispers broke out. Jackson's face darkened. "What the hell did you do?" Ethan stood up, taking his time. He slipped his hands into his pockets and smiled. "Checkmate." Jackson's face turned beet red as he yanked his phone from his pocket, frantically scrolling through the article. The headline was brutal. "Corrupt business tycoon Jackson Hayes caught in financial fraud scandal." Mia could see the panic in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. Neither had the rest of the restaurant, who were now gawking at their phones, reading about the man who had just walked in like he owned the place. Ethan stood calm, his expression unreadable, but Mia saw the spark of satisfaction in his gaze. He had planned this perfectly. Jackson's hands clenched into fists. "You think this is funny?" His voice was dangerously low. Ethan finally took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I think justice is funny. You see, Jackson, I know what you've been doing behind closed doors. The embezzlement, the fake investments, the offshore accounts. And now," he gestured around the room. "Now everyone knows too." Jackson let out a hollow laugh. "You think you can ruin me with one article?" Ethan shrugged. "No, but the federal investigators who received all the documents might." The color drained from Jackson's face. That was it. The final blow. Mia stole a glance at Mr. Langford, who was watching the entire exchange with quiet satisfaction. For the first time in years, the fear in his eyes was gone. Jackson turned on his heel, his jaw tight. "This isn't over," he spat. Ethan just smiled. "Oh, I know. But next time, try playing fair." With that, Jackson stormed out, his lackeys trailing behind him. The moment the door shut behind them, the restaurant erupted into whispers. Some were recording, some were whispering excitedly, and a few even started clapping. Mia exhaled the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She turned to Ethan, shaking her head. "You really don't do anything halfway, do you?" Ethan smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" Mr. Langford stepped forward, clasping Ethan's shoulder. "You just saved this restaurant." Ethan shook his head. "No, you did. You just needed a little backup." Mia couldn't help but smile. This was more than a victory. It was a new beginning. The restaurant buzzed with energy long after Jackson stormed out. The weight that had been hanging over the place was finally gone. The staff smiled more freely. The customers lingered to chat, and Mr. Langford looked 10 years younger. Mia finished wiping down a table and glanced at Ethan, who was standing near the bar. Something about him still didn't sit right with her. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made her think she was missing something big. She walked over, crossing her arms. "All right, spill it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Spill what?" Mia rolled her eyes. "I know you're not just some random guy who decided to take down Jackson Hayes out of boredom. So who are you really? For a moment, Ethan just looked at her. Then, he let out a small chuckle. You're sharp, Mia. I like that. Before she could protest, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something. A sleek black business card. Mia took it, her eyes widening as she read the name Ethan Luxtancio. Luxton, as she blinked. Then again, the name hit her like a freight train. Wait, no way. She looked up at him. You're Ethan Luxton? As in, one of the richest CEOs in the country. Ethan smirked. Guilty. Mia's head spun. She'd been talking to a billionaire this whole time? Not just a billionaire, but a man who had been on magazine covers, in interviews, someone the entire business world admired. And he had been kicked out of the restaurant for looking like a homeless man. Mia's stomach dropped. Oh my God, she muttered. I helped kick you out. Ethan laughed. Yeah, you did. Her face burned. Why didn't you say anything? Ethan shrugged. Because people act different when they know you have money. I wanted to see what this place was really like without my name getting in the way. He paused, and I wanted to see who would judge me before knowing my story. Mia stared at him, her mind racing. Everything suddenly made sense. His confidence, his mysterious aura, the way Mr. Langford had treated him after recognizing him. She took a deep breath. So what happens now? Ethan's smirk softened into something more genuine. Now, I make things right. The restaurant was unusually quiet after Ethan's revelation. Mia still held the business card between her fingers, staring at it like it might suddenly vanish. She had just unknowingly helped kick out one of the most powerful men in the country. Langford, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Luxton. Ethan lifted a hand. Relax, Langford. It's fine. He smirked. Though I gotta say, your staff might need a lesson in treating customers fairly. Mia flinched. Was she about to get fired? But Ethan turned back to her, his expression surprisingly amused. You though? He chuckled. You stood up for what was right. That's rare. Mia swallowed. I just did what I thought was fair. Ethan nodded. That's exactly why I like you. Before Mia could process what that meant, a loud voice interrupted. You're Ethan Luxton. Jackson Hayes had stormed back into the restaurant, his face red with rage. He pointed a shaking finger at Ethan. You're lying. There's no way. Ethan turned slowly, his smirk never faltering. Welcome back, Jackson. Miss me? Jackson scoffed. You expect me to believe that you're some billionaire CEO? He glanced at Mia, then Langford. Come on, this has to be a joke. But then, something else happened. The restaurant doors swung open. Two sharply dressed men in suits entered, security guards. Behind them, a man with salt and pepper hair, dressed in an expensive designer suit, stepped in. James Caldwell, Ethan Luxton's personal assistant and right-hand man, he walked straight up to Ethan and spoke in a low, professional tone. Mr. Luxton, your car is ready. The board meeting has been rescheduled for tomorrow, as per your request. Jackson's face lost all color. This was real. Mia's jaw nearly dropped. The entire restaurant staff stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Ethan turned back to Jackson, folding his arms. Still think I'm lying? Jackson stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't know. Ethan cut him off. That's exactly the problem, Jackson. You judged me based on how I looked. You treated me like garbage because you thought I was beneath you. He shook his head. And that says everything about the kind of person you are. Jackson's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. But there was none. Ethan glanced at Langford. Tell me, is this how you want your restaurant to be known? As a place that throws out people based on appearances? Langford shook his head quickly. No, absolutely not. Ethan smiled. Good. He looked back at Jackson, who was now sweating. Because I have a feeling your time here is up. Jackson's legs felt weak beneath him. The weight of his mistake pressed down like a boulder. He had thrown a billionaire out of the restaurant, humiliated him, and now the truth was staring him in the face. He turned to Langford, desperate. Sir, Langford cut him off. Jackson, enough. I've tolerated your behavior for too long. His voice was firm, his decision clear. Pack your things. You're fired. The words hit Jackson like a slap. Fired. Langford nodded. Effective immediately. This restaurant is built on respect and hospitality, something you clearly lack. Mia gasped. She had expected some kind of reprimand, but this was beyond what she imagined. Jackson had been here for years. Jackson turned back to Ethan. Please, this was a misunderstanding. Ethan didn't blink. The only misunderstanding was that you thought money made you better than others. He slid his hands into his pockets. Now you know it doesn't. Security escorted Jackson out, his protests fading into the night. The restaurant fell silent again. Langford turned to Ethan, swallowing hard. Mr. Luxton, I sincerely apologize for what happened tonight. This is not how we treat people here. Ethan nodded slowly. I believe you, Langford, but actions matter more than words. Mia's heart pounded. Was Ethan going to shut the restaurant down? Would he demand a lawsuit? A takeover? Instead, Ethan smiled. That's why I'm buying this place. Mia's eyes widened. Did she hear that right? Buying the restaurant? Langford repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. Ethan nodded. That's right. I want this place. And I don't mean as some corporate chain where the soul is stripped out. I mean as something real. Langford hesitated. But why? You could own any restaurant. Why this one? Ethan leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Because I grew up eating in places like this. Small, family-owned spots where people actually cared about their customers. Places where the staff weren't just workers. They were part of a community. Mia esse berättigt. He cared. Ethan turned to her. I've been looking for a business investment that matters. Something with heart. Tonight I found it. Langford exhaled deeply. And what do you plan to do with it? Ethan's smile returned, sharp and full of promise. First, I'll make sure the right people are in charge. He turned to Mia, starting with you. Mia blinked. And me? Ethan nodded. I saw how you handled tonight. You stood up for what's right, even when it was hard. That's the kind of leadership this place needs. Langford chuckled. You're offering her a management position? Ethan smirked. No, I'm offering her part ownership. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Mia's knees nearly buckled. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I don't have money to buy into. Ethan cut her off with a wave of his hand. Consider it my first executive decision. You've earned it. Tears pricked at Mia's eyes. I don't know what to say. Ethan grinned. Say yes. Mia swallowed hard, looking at the man she had once thought was just another customer. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this was a chance of a lifetime, and she wasn't about to waste it. Yes. The next morning, the restaurant buzzed with nervous energy. Employees whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what had happened the night before. Mia stood at the entrance, her heart pounding. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was now part owner of this place. Ethan walked in, dressed sharply in a tailored suit. He looked every bit the billionaire he was. But today, there was no pretense, no disguise, just him, ready to make a change. Langford clapped a hand on Mia's shoulder. Ready? She exhaled and nodded. Ready. Ethan stepped forward and cleared his throat. Everyone, I have an announcement. Silence fell over the room. As of today, I officially own this restaurant. Gasps erupted. Some employees looked excited, others terrified. Ethan continued, but I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm here to make things better. That starts with a new management structure, one that values hard work and fairness. He gestured to Mia, which is why Mia is stepping up as co-owner and general manager. The room burst into chatter. Mia saw a mix of shock, admiration, and, most surprisingly, pride from her coworkers. One of the chefs, a gruff older man named Tony, crossed his arms. So, does this mean we're just answering to some waitress now? Mia's stomach twisted, but Ethan's response was swift. No, Tony. It means you're answering to someone who's been in your shoes. Someone who understands what it's like to work the late shifts, deal with difficult customers, and keep this place running. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to leave. Tony grumbled, but his expression softened. Just making sure. Mia took a deep breath and stepped forward. Look, I know this is a big change, but I promise you, I'm not here to boss you around. I want to make this place better for all of us. A murmur of approval rippled through the staff. Ethan nodded, pleased. That's the kind of leadership this place needs. Then, with a grin, he turned back to Langford. Now let's talk about that menu. I have a few ideas. Mia couldn't help but smile. this was just the beginning. A week later, the restaurant felt different, lighter, more hopeful. Ethan had spent days working closely with Mia and Langford, listening to their ideas and getting to know the staff. He wasn't just an owner barking orders. He was involved, invested. Today, however, was a big day. The official relaunch of the restaurant under its new ownership. Mia stood outside, watching as workers hung a brand new sign above the entrance. The name hadn't changed, but the energy behind it had. Langford whistled. Well, look at that. Same place, but with a fresh start. Mia grinned. And a new menu, new policies, and a fair wage system. Ethan approached, holding a clipboard. And don't forget the new customer experience. This isn't just going to be a restaurant. It's going to be a place people talk about. Mia chuckled. You really think we can make this place that's special? Ethan smirked. I don't think. I know. The first guests began to arrive. Regulars, some curious new faces, and even a few social media influencers Ethan had quietly invited. Then, the moment that changed everything, that a sleek black car pulled up and the driver rushed to open the door. A tall, imposing man stepped out, his presence commanding attention that Mia's breath caught. She recognized him instantly. Langford muttered under his breath. Is that? Ethan grinned. That's Robert Sinclair, the biggest restaurant critic in the city. Mia's stomach flipped. A critic? Today? If they failed now, the entire relaunch could be ruined before it even started. She shot Ethan a nervous glance, but he just winked. Relax, Mia. We got this. But did they? The atmosphere inside the restaurant buzzed with nervous excitement. Every staff member knew who Robert Sinclair was, a man whose words could make or break a restaurant overnight. Mia's palms were sweaty as she watched him settle into a table near the corner, his sharp eyes scanning the space with quiet intensity. Would he recognize Ethan? Would he judge them before even tasting the food? Ethan, calm as ever, leaned over. Just treat him like any other customer. We're not here to impress him. We're here to be the best version of what this restaurant can be. Mia took a deep breath and nodded. I got this. She walked over, trying to steady her voice. Good evening, sir. Welcome. My name is Mia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Sinclair barely looked up. Water, no lemon, and bring me your best dish. Mia swallowed hard. Absolutely, sir. She hurried to the kitchen, where Langford was already at work, moving with the precision of a seasoned chef. We need perfection, she whispered. Langford nodded. Trust me, I know what's at stake. Minutes later, the plate was ready, a perfectly seared steak, drizzled with a rich, herb-infused sauce, paired with buttery roasted vegetables. Their signature dish. Mia carefully placed it in front of Sinclair. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as he picked up his knife and fork. A single bite, then another. His expression remained unreadable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he dabbed his lips with a napkin and set his utensils down. He looked up at Mia. Who owns this place? Mia hesitated, then pointed toward Ethan. Sinclair's eyes locked onto Ethan. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. He knew that a tense silence fell over the room. Then, to everyone's shock, Sinclair chuckled. Clever. Very clever. He leaned back, smirking. I don't know whether to be furious that I didn't see through your disguise or impressed that you actually pulled this off. Ethan finally approached the table, offering a handshake. You tell me, Robert, was the food worth it? Sinclair studied him for a moment, then shook his hand. I'll write my review in the morning, but let's just say, I'll be back. Mia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They did it. The staff burst into silent cheers. The restaurant had passed its biggest test yet. But for Mia, this was just the beginning. As the evening wound down, the energy in the restaurant was electric. The staff was relieved, the customer satisfied, and Ethan, well, he was smiling. Really smiling. Mia nudged him. You should smile like that more often. Makes you look less intimidating. Ethan smirked. Noted. Langford joined them, wiping his hands on his apron. We pulled it off. The critic didn't tear us apart. That's a win in my book. Mia exhaled, still running on adrenaline. Yeah, but we won't know for sure until his review comes out. Ethan glanced toward the door, where Robert Sinclair was stepping into a waiting car. I have a feeling we'll be okay." But just as Mia was beginning to relax, the door swung open again that a man in a dark suit walked in, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Cold eyes scanned the room, landing directly on Ethan. Mia stiffened. Something about him felt off. The man walked straight to Ethan and extended a business card. "Mr. Carter, I presume." Ethan took the card without looking at it. "Who's asking?" The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "Someone with a very lucrative offer. One I think you'll want to hear." Mia exchanged a nervous glance with Langford. Just when things were finally settling down, something new was about to shake everything up. And from the look in a stranger's eyes, this wasn't just business. This was personal. Ethan narrowed his eyes at the man in the suit. He'd seen that look before, cold, calculating, the look of someone used to getting their way. "If you have something to say, say it." His voice was calm but firm. The man smirked. "Not here. A conversation like this deserves a more private setting." Mia's instincts flared. She stepped closer to Ethan. "If it's business, it can be handled here." The man barely glanced at her. "Miss, this is above your pay grade." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Try that tone again, and you'll be handling your business with a broken nose." The man raised an eyebrow, seemingly amused rather than intimidated. "All right, fair enough. Let's cut to it. My employer is very interested in your return to the business world, and he's willing to make it worth your while." Ethan crossed his arms. "I'm not interested." The smirk remained. "Funny, I haven't even told you the offer yet." "Doesn't matter." Ethan's voice was ice. "I walked away for a reason." For the first time, the man's smile faltered. "My employer doesn't take no lightly." Mia felt the tension between them like a live wire. Who was this guy? And what exactly had Ethan walked away from? The man slipped his hands into his pockets. "I'll leave you with this, then. If you change your mind, call me." He tapped the business card in Ethan's hand and turned to leave. But just before he stepped out the door, he paused and looked back. "Oh, and Ethan, I'd make a decision sooner rather than later. The offer might not always be on the table." With that, he disappeared into the night. Mia turned to Ethan. Who the hell was that? Ethan exhaled, looking down at the business card. And for the first time since she met him, he looked truly unsettled. The weight of the business card in Ethan's hand felt heavier than it should. He had hoped the past was behind him. But as always, it had a way of finding its way back into his life. Mia was staring at him, waiting for an answer. She could see the discomfort in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. Ethan was always the man in control, the one who could handle any situation with ease. But now, he was distracted, torn. Who is he, Ethan? Her voice softened, trying not to push too hard, but the curiosity burned inside her. Ethan finally looked at her, his jaw tightening. He worked for someone who, well, someone he used to be very involved with. Mia's mind raced. Involved with? Who was this person? Before she could ask another question, Langford appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. His eyes locked on Ethan. That guy just gave you a business card. What did he want? Ethan glanced between them, then slid the card into his pocket. He wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. Nothing we can't handle. But his tone didn't sound convincing. Langford didn't push any further, but raised an eyebrow. If you say so. Mia wasn't convinced. You've got a lot of secrets, Ethan. And I get it, everyone does. But this guy, he looks like trouble. Ethan leaned against the bar, running a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. I thought I was done with that life. But people don't just let you walk away. Not when you've been involved in the things I've been involved in. Mia's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? What did you do? Before he could answer, the restaurant door swung open again, and a familiar face stepped inside. It was Rachel, one of the regulars. Hey guys, she called out, noticing the tense atmosphere. Everything okay? Ethan quickly straightened up, trying to mask the discomfort. Yeah, everything's fine. Just some business to handle. Mia shot him a look, but didn't press any further. Rachel flashed a warm smile. Well, I'll be honest, I've been hearing whispers around town about a big name coming to visit. A major investor. You guys looking to expand? Ethan froze. An investor? Mia's stomach churned. Could it be related to the stranger who had just left? Ethan glanced at her, his eyes narrowed. I don't know, but I think I need to find out. The next few days were a blur for Ethan. He had tried to bury the conversation with the mysterious man in the suit at the back of his mind, but it was impossible. The business card weighed heavily on him, a reminder that his past was more than just a history. It was a specter haunting his every step. Ethan had always been able to compartmentalize his life. The business, the family, the power. He had made a name for himself, built an empire from nothing. But none of that mattered if he couldn't escape the people who had known him before. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Ethan sat at the bar in the restaurant, nursing a drink. His thoughts were a tangled mess, each one pulling him in a different direction. Could he really go back to that world? He wasn't the same man who had walked away from it years ago. Suddenly, Langford appeared at the bar, his face taut with urgency. "Ethan, I think I need to take this one seriously." Ethan looked up, intrigued by the serious tone in Langford's voice. "What happened?" Langford slid a piece of paper across the counter. It was a news article, one that made Ethan's blood run cold. The article's about an investor looking to buy out local businesses. "They're targeting exactly what we're doing here." Ethan read the headline, his stomach sinking. It wasn't just any investor. It was the same name on the business card, the same man who had entered the restaurant days ago, with his cold smile and hollow words. Langford noticed the change in Ethan's demeanor. "What's going on? Who is this guy?" Ethan took a deep breath and set the article down. "He's not just an investor. He's a force, a powerful one." Mia walked up, overhearing the last part of their conversation. She could tell something was off. "What are you not telling me?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then met her eyes. "I'm not who you think I am." She didn't respond immediately. The weight of his words hung in the air, thick with tension. Just then, the restaurant door creaked open, and a familiar figure stepped inside. Rachel. But something was different this time. Her expression was serious, her usual cheer replaced with a look of urgency. "Ethan, you need to see this." She held up her phone, and Ethan glanced at the screen. His heart dropped into his stomach. The headline on the news feed was damning. "Local investor with ties to mafia seeks to take over small businesses." Mia looked over at Ethan, her face pale. "This is the man you've been trying to avoid, isn't it?" Ethan took a steadying breath, the weight of the truth finally crashing over him. "It's worse than I thought. The past I walked away from is pulling me back in. And this time, there's no way out." The days following the revelation felt like an endless blur for Ethan. The weight of the past, the looming threat of the mysterious investor, and the fear of what might come next pressed down on him relentlessly. He tried to leave that life behind, but now it seemed like the past had other plans. Ethan sat in his office, staring out the window at the city below. The lights twinkled like stars, each one a symbol of the success he had worked so hard to achieve. But none of it mattered if this new enemy was as dangerous as he feared. "Ethan, we need to talk." It was Mia. Her voice broke through the fog of his thoughts. He turned to face her, his heart heavy. She was standing in the doorway, her face etched with concern. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping inside. Ethan hesitated but finally spoke. "The man who came to the restaurant? He's more than just an investor. He's part of something much bigger, and I'm afraid it's coming for us." Mia walked toward him, her eyes searching his face. "What do you mean? What is this world you're talking about?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing as he tried to find the right words. "It's the world I try to leave behind. A world where deals are made in shadows, and people don't always walk away from them. The man who came to the restaurant is part of an underground network, and if he's targeting us, it means he wants more than just our business. He wants control." Mia swallowed hard, trying to process what he was saying. "So what do we do now?" Ethan stood up, his mind made up. "We fight back. We can't let him take everything we've built." As the two of them spoke, there was a knock at the door. Langford entered, his face grim. "Ethan, we have a problem." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Langford handed him a folder. "The investors' people. They've already started making moves. We've been watching them. It's bad. They're infiltrating local businesses, offering buyouts, and coercing people into compliance." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "We knew this was coming, but it's happening faster than I expected." Mia stepped forward. "We can't let them get away with this. But how do we stop them?" Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. We gather intel, we fight back strategically. We have connections in this city, people who owe us favors. We'll use everything we've got. But deep down, Ethan knew the stakes were higher than he was letting on. The past wasn't just threatening his business, it was threatening his life and everyone he cared about. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Ethan was no longer just the CEO of a thriving business. He had become a man at war, forced to fight not only for his empire, but for his freedom. Every decision now felt heavier, more consequential. The team, including Mia and Langford, had gathered at Ethan's private office late one evening, the atmosphere tense as they discussed their strategy. Ethan paced the room, his mind racing as he processed the new information that had come to light. The investors' operation was far more sophisticated than they had initially realized. "We need to make sure we're not walking into a trap," Ethan said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "Every move they make is calculated. This is no longer just about taking over our business, it's about taking control of the city." Langford nodded, his face serious. "We've been tracking their movements, and it's clear they're working with some powerful people. But we can't back down. We need to push back now, before they get any stronger." Mia looked at Ethan, her concern evident. "But what's the plan? How do we fight back when they have so many resources at their disposal?" Ethan stopped pacing and turned to face her. The truth was that he didn't know how to fight this war. "We start by taking back the control we have. We need leverage, information, anything we can use against them." Langford reached into his bag and pulled out a thick file. "We've been working on this. We've managed to get a few names of people in their network. These are key players, the ones who can help us understand who's really behind all of this." Ethan took the file, his heart pounding in his chest. The list of names was long, and each one was tied to a different part of the underground world that Ethan had tried to leave behind. "We'll need to use everything we have. I'm not playing this game with them. If they want to take us down, they'll have to go through me." The tension in the room was palpable. Mia stood up, her eyes fierce. "Then we take them down first." For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. That's the spirit. The following week was a blur of phone calls, meetings, and covert operations. Ethan and his team worked tirelessly, trying to stay one step ahead of the mysterious investor. They had identified a few key locations where the investor's people were operating, but the threat was much more extensive than they anticipated. One evening, as Ethan reviewed the intel they had gathered, a message flashed across his phone, a name that sent a chill down his spine. The message was from a contact Ethan had trusted in the past. "The investor's plan is moving faster than you think. They've already infiltrated your local network." Ethan's hand trembled as he set the phone down. "They're inside our system." His voice was low, almost himself. This was more than just a takeover. It was a full-on assault. Mia, who had been quietly observing from across the room, stood up. "What do we do now?" Ethan turned to her, his eyes hardening. "We go after them. We don't wait. We strike first." Langford, who had been monitoring the situation from his office across town, called in. "Ethan, I've got something. The investor is meeting with some of our competitors tomorrow. We need to act fast." Without hesitation, Ethan made the call to gather the team. "Get ready. This is our chance." The night of the meeting arrived. Ethan's pulse was racing as he stood in front of the team, ready to make his move. "We have one shot at this," he told them, his voice low but filled with determination. "We hit hard, we hit fast, and we don't look back." The team nodded in unison, their faces grim but resolute, as they arrived at the meeting place. A dimly lit warehouse just outside the city. Ethan could feel the tension thick in the air. The investors were inside, but so were their mercenaries. Ethan knew that they would stop at nothing to protect their plans. He turned to Mia, Langford, and the others. "Remember, we're not just fighting for this business. We're fighting for everything we've built, for our future." With that, they moved in. The air in the warehouse was thick with tension as Ethan and his team crept closer to the entrance. Their movements were precise, their minds focused on one thing: taking down the investor and his network before they could do any more damage. The warehouse was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of machinery and the distant sounds of footsteps echoing in the dark. Ethan's heart raced, his instincts alert to every shift in the air. They were about to face the very people who had been trying to tear down everything they had worked for. "Stay close," he whispered to Mia, who was right behind him. Langford and the others flanked the sides, each one poised to act at a moment's notice. They had planned this for days, every step, every action carefully mapped out. Now, there was no turning back. As they entered the warehouse, they saw a figure silhouetted against the faint light coming from the far end. There, gathered around a long table, were the investors and their key players, smiling, laughing, completely unaware of the impending danger. "Let's make this quick," Ethan said, motioning for the team to spread out. Just as they were about to approach the group, a voice called out from the shadows. "I knew you'd come." Ethan froze. The voice was cold, calculating, familiar. It sent a shiver down his spine. "You knew?" Ethan asked, turning toward the source of the voice. From the shadows emerged a figure Ethan had hoped he would never see again. Victor Devereaux, the man behind the investor, and a ghost from Ethan's past. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Ethan," Victor said with a smug grin. "But you should have known I was always one step ahead." Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the rage surge through him. "I didn't come here to talk, Victor. I came here to end this." Victor's eyes gleamed, and his smile widened. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a pawn in a much bigger game." Before Ethan could respond, the door to the warehouse slammed shut with a deafening noise. The rest of Victor's men had surrounded them. "Looks like we're at a crossroads," Victor said, his tone almost taunting. "You can either surrender, or we can make this interesting." Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle in. He knew this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival. The stakes had never been higher. "We're not backing down," Ethan said, his voice cold and steady. "You're going to pay for everything you've done." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, without warning, Victor's men lunged forward, and the fight for their future began. Chaos erupted in the warehouse. Ethan's team, trained for moments like this, moved swiftly and efficiently. Langford, who was a former military strategist, led the charge, taking down opponents with precision. Mia, ever resourceful, used the environment to her advantage, setting traps and creating distractions that kept the enemy on edge. Ethan, at the center of it all, was focused on one goal: getting to Victor. "You can't outrun this, Ethan," Victor yelled, ducking behind a stack of crates. "About the power here." But Ethan wasn't listening. His mind was clear. He knew what had to be done. "You had the power, Victor," Ethan muttered, his eyes narrowing. "But you never had the vision." With a sudden burst of speed, Ethan charged at Victor. The two men collided in the center of the warehouse, grappling with each other. Fists flew, and the sound of their struggle echoed through the building. Victor was strong, but Ethan was fueled by a fury that came from everything he had lost. "You ruined lives for your gain, Victor," he spat, throwing a punch that landed squarely in Victor's jaw. Victor staggered back, his expression twisting with anger. "I didn't ruin anything. I just played the game better than you." Ethan shook his head. "The game's over, Victor. You lost." As Victor tried to regain his footing, the rest of the team fought back the remaining mercenaries. It was a brutal battle, but Ethan knew they were winning. Just as he was about to land the final blow on Victor, there was a loud crash from behind them. The door to the warehouse flew open, and more armed men rushed in. But this time, it wasn't the enemy, it was the police. "Freeze!" a voice commanded. Ethan looked up, his heart skipping a beat. It was Detective Harris, the officer who had once helped him during an earlier investigation. "What is this?" Victor sneered, his confidence wavering for the first time. "This is my operation. You can't stop me." Detective Harris stepped forward, his eyes locked on Victor. "Actually, we can. We've been watching you for months, Devereaux. You're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and a whole lot more." Victor's face turned pale. You're making a mistake." But the truth was clear. The game was over. The room was still echoing with the sounds of struggle as Detective Harris and his team moved quickly, securing the remaining members of Victor's operation. Ethan, breathless and bruised, stood over Victor, who was now lying on the ground with handcuffs securing his wrists. His once proud expression had dissolved into one of shock and disbelief. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but the adrenaline was starting to fade. As Harris approached, he gave a nod of respect toward Ethan, his eyes scanning the scene. "You did it," Harris said, his voice steady. "But don't think for a second this is over. There's still a lot of work to be done." Ethan wiped the sweat off his brow and looked at Victor one last time, the man who had threatened to destroy everything Ethan had worked so hard to build. "It's over for him," Ethan said, his voice cold, but his expression was firm. Victor glared at him, still defiant, even though the realization of defeat was starting to settle in. "You think this will be the end?" Victor spat. "You have no idea what's coming next. I've made connections you'll never even understand." Ethan leaned closer, his voice low but filled with finality. "You should have thought about that before you decided to play dirty. This is the end of the line for you." Victor's mouth twisted into a bitter smile, but the fire in his eyes was gone. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts. It'll be short-lived." As Harris's team escorted Victor out of the warehouse, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't over yet, but the battle had been won. The weight that had been pressing on his shoulders for months now seemed a little lighter. In the days that followed, the full extent of Victor's criminal enterprise came to light. The web of deceit, money laundering, and corruption that Victor had orchestrated stretched far beyond what anyone had imagined. The police, with Harris's guidance, moved quickly to dismantle the network, arresting key players who had worked with Victor. For Ethan and his team, it was a time of reflection. Their lives had been in turmoil for so long, constantly fighting against the threat of ruin. But now, with the main enemy behind bars, they could finally breathe. The first meeting after the arrest was a quiet one, held in the conference room of their offices. Mia, Langford, and Ethan sat around the table, the weight of their work finally starting to sink in. "I can't believe it's over," Mia said, her voice a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We did it." Langford, ever the pragmatist, nodded. "It's over, but there's still a lot to fix. We got to rebuild what we lost. We got to make sure something like this never happens again." Ethan looked around the room, at the faces of his team, his family. They'd all been through so much, each one of them enduring their own battles. But they had emerged victorious, and they were stronger for it. "We'll rebuild," Ethan said with conviction. "We've got the vision, and now we've got the chance to make it right. We're not going anywhere." The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still obstacles to face, but with the right team and a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan knew they could overcome anything. They had been tested and had come out the other side, not unscathed, but more determined than ever. Weeks passed, and the dust finally began to settle. The company was starting to pick up the pieces, and the impact of their work was starting to show. Ethan's team had rebuilt from the ground up, securing the future they had fought for so long to protect. Victor Devereux, now behind bars, was being tried for a litany of crimes. His network was dismantled, his influence reduced to nothing. The powerful empire he had built was crumbling piece by piece. But as Ethan watched the progress, he knew that the true victory was more than just the downfall of a corrupt man. It was the opportunity to rise again, to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. In a quiet moment, sitting on the rooftop of their office building, Ethan reflected on the journey. "We did it," he murmured to himself. "We really did it." Mia, who had joined him on the roof, smiled softly. "We're not just survivors, Ethan. We're builders." As they watched the sun set over the city, the skyline now representing something more than just a symbol of business. It was a symbol of resilience, of their ability to overcome and start anew. The story of their triumph over corruption would be remembered, but for Ethan, the real victory was in the chance to rebuild, a chance to create something meaningful, something that would stand for years to come. And with that, they had won more than just a battle. They had reclaimed their future.